Well, good morning, everyone. Whether you're here joining us in person or joining us online, my name is Peter Thompson. I'm the vicar here at St. Bart's, and it's my joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And on this weekend, Friday was Veterans Day, so it is Veterans Day weekend. We are talking about those who have served our country in the military and how we, as those who welcome them out of service, can better support them. And we're here with Harry Foster. He's currently an undergraduate student at Columbia. He's a veteran, a Marine, and he's a humanities fellow with the Warrior Scholar Project, which is one of the projects that helps veterans re-enter civilian life. Harry, thank you so much for being with us on this important weekend.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. So let's start with a little bit more about who you are and what the Warrior Scholar Project is.
Okay. So I joined the military right after high school, like a lot of people do. I didn't really feel like I was ready for school, and there were a bunch of other reasons, but that was the primary one. After I got out and started community college, the Warrior Scholar Project came to my school, Saddleback College, and it was a one-day sort of thing, and they taught study skills and analytical reading, and I was like all in. And this was around 2019, summer 2019. And then later that summer, I did a full 1-week boot camp of their humanities course at Columbia University. I stayed at Hogan Hall for a week, and then I decided to apply, and I got in, and since then I've been studying English and creative writing, and it's been kind of an interesting journey. Like, it sometimes doesn't feel real, you know. Like you kind of read about that thing happening, and then it's like, oh, it's me. I'm the thing that's happening. So, and then I've been very, very blessed for the past 2 summers to give back to Warrior Scholar as a humanities fellow, where I myself now am part of the team that teaches analytical reading, study skills, time management, all that kinds of thing. And we have 3 programs. There's the STEM program, the business program, and of course the humanities program. And we're on this past summer, and looking like this next summer, we're going to be on 24 campuses around the country. Most of the Ivy League, really, really large state schools, MIT, Caltech, and some local schools like Fayetteville State is more recent, and also our first HBCU, which is really exciting. So
So what does the project do? What does the program entail, and how's it structured?
Yeah, so it started out, I think, simply as a way for veterans to gain applicable skills for a humanities education. I think one of the founders, Jesse Rising, he was quoted in saying that, we sign up to defend the constitutions with our bodies, but it's important that we learn to defend the Constitution with our mind. So that's kind of where it started in humanities education, and then as time went on and more professors and schools got involved, realized, oh, well, not everybody's going to want to get an English degree, so they started adding the STEM program, and then they added the business program. STEM program provides basic skills in physics and statistics, and they get to work on a special project with people in the field that they're interested in, which is really, really fascinating. And then the business program is oriented towards veterans who want to get an education towards entrepreneurship. Typically, most programs have a week of humanities. There are very rare few programs that have just 1 week of STEM, but those are for people who just don't really like writing, and the time permits. They prefer to focus on mathematics and things like that. And it's boot camp is an apt word, because you're up from about 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. Longer if you're in STEM, because math is hard. And basically, typically, you have a study group in the morning where we go over the previous night's readings, and then we have an activity of some kind, like maybe like a college tour, given what campus we're at, and then they'll get a lecture from the professor in the top in their field. And then after that, they get 4 hours of writing instruction in the afternoon, followed by tutoring in the evening. That's the typical humanities day. And it's sort of structured similarly for the other programs. And what's really cool is that the themes of Humanities Week is always themes of democracy and freedom, which, coming off the heels of our most recent election, is kind of important. So we have 5 units. Unit 1 is just getting a basic understanding of where our democracy comes from and looking at the Constitution and Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. Unit 2 is beginning to look at the Federalist Papers and factions and things like that. Unit 3 is the origins of democracy. So we're looking at Thucydides and Herodotus, which is a really great classical lecture. And then Unit 4 is testing that. So we're looking at the civil rights movement, the suffrage, women's rights movement, and all those kinds of things. And then finally, Unit 5 is typically looking at the transition between military and civilian. And we look at readings from Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, Patton, and people who talked about the military-industrial complex and what that means. Yeah.
So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about you and your
Sure.
personal story for a minute. Take us back to when you were 18 and enlisted. What influenced that decision? What were you hoping to get out of your experience in the military, and did you get that?
I got a lot more than I bargained for. One of the first things my dad told me, because he had served under Reagan, when I told him what I wanted to do, because I'm the middle of 5, so he's got two kids on either side to worry about. So when I told him I was going to do, and I've always been the more reserved one of us. So usually when I talk to him, he doesn't freak out immediately. And when I told him I was going to join the military, he was like, "Well, just make sure you know what you're getting into," because he also knows that typically I like to think things through. And you know what? I don't think I ever took that seriously, because what I did was I researched, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos about the military, which, if anyone can tell you, that will never, honestly, I think there's nothing that could ever really prepare you for service, truly, other than doing it. So what I wanted was an adventure, from a sort of a small town in Georgia. Is where I graduated high school, and then, originally from Texas, but so I wanted some adventure. I wanted to see some place I'd never seen before, and wanted to go be my own person and not just the middle child, and a bunch of other reasons, and maybe I'd seen too many movies growing up. I don't know, if you could really pinpoint one reason, but mostly I figured there was. Actually, funny story, I actually started an application to Columbia my senior year of high school. I took the SAT, I got a 1600, which at the time was only out of 2400, so it's not that impressive. Like, now it's 16, so everyone keeps telling me not to add that 24 part, but it just feels so dishonest. But yeah, I got a 1600. I didn't study, so I was like, well, it's a pretty average score. I'm not going to get anywhere fancy with that. And this was like right on the heels of President Obama being reelected. And so I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to go to Columbia. I want to be a writer and all this other stuff. And then halfway through the application, I was just like, there's no way I'm getting in. So, it's funny, there's a 17-year-old half-finished application just sitting there. And I decided to join the Marines because my best friend joined, and also I knew that the Marine Corps would test me more than any other branch would, like in the way that I wanted to be tested physically and mentally, getting a little bit tougher, because, I had a bit of a sheltered life, I think. So at 19, my first job was Intel. I didn't do so well, so they ended up giving me a new job being a combat engineer, and that was very, very demanding, both physically and mentally. We did a lot of work in construction, building obstacles, and looking for IEDs and that kind of thing. So it was a job that demanded physical a lot of physical effort, but also a lot of mental effort. You have to really, really be able to think to be a combat engineer. And so when I say that I got a lot more than I bargained for, that's part of the reason why, is because I signed up to do something, that I thought would be, just a mental challenge, which I felt kind of arrogantly that I'd be able to handle. And then now it's like, no, you have to think and be physical, and that's very, very different.
What was the highlight of your years of service, and what was most challenging?
Highlight? Probably deployment. Deployment really opened my eyes to ideas of citizenship and what that means. Because for one, I was deployed on a MU, which basically means I hope the veterans are watching these because it's going to be a very simplified version. But essentially what it means is that you hop on a boat and you sort of sail around in the sea until bad things happen, and then you get off the boat, go deal with the bad things, and you come back. That's essentially how it works. So it's like sometimes that's humanitarian. So there's lots of hurricanes that hit other countries, and engineers especially are equipped to help rebuild and help with infrastructure type things. So sometimes, like maybe the Philippines or somewhere around the Pacific. And then, occasionally we go to the Middle East, and that year we ended up going to the Middle East. I don't know, the deployment was, I've dealt with the most kind of things that year. I feel like that was the pinnacle of being tested, and pretty much any service member, let alone any Marine, will tell you that, there's something very unfulfilling about being trained to do something and then never getting to do it. So I had an opportunity to do the job that I was trained for, and it showed me a lot about myself. You spend 2 months. I think the crazy thing for me was going 2 weeks without sunlight, which is a strange thought. Like, you see the sun every day, but for 2 weeks I didn't see the sun, and realize how much that affects you, and other things like being in tight quarters with a bunch of your best friends is another really interesting experience. But I think also getting off the ship and realizing that you're in another country wearing an American flag and you're representing something that's bigger than you, and it makes you think like, okay, I need to be not necessarily be on my best behavior, but I need to be conscious of what I'm doing. And then when I go in a country to do my job, it's strange to see, regardless of what you see on the news, but there are some people over there who were glad for our help. Very, very, very glad for our help, and it put a lot of things about American life in perspective, in the sense that when I came home, a lot of the problems that Americans deal with every day, and they don't matter as much to me. They seem inconsequential in the face of what everyone else around the world is dealing with. Like, there's people who have much harder lives who, if you look at Ukraine, their infrastructure is ruined. They're fighting very hard for their lives, and whether or not they win or lose, their lives will never be the same, because a war has been fought in their country, and that's something America has never experienced. And the closest we've come is Pearl Harbor, and look how much that affected us. And then also 9/11, right? Look how much but there was no concentrated war fought in this country, except for the Civil War, but that was between us. And again, look how much that affected us. So, coming home from a combat experience, it put a lot of things in perspective. It also made me very sure of my own life path. I knew I wanted to get out. I knew I wanted to pursue teaching. I knew I wanted to read. And now that I survived deployment, it's like life's too short not to do what makes you happy, or not to do what you feel like your purpose is. So I would say, like, to sum it all up, deployment was like the highlight of my military service, because I was blessed to be able to be challenged in that way. And then what I took from that was a sort of surety about where I need to go next in life.
So when you got to the end of your 5 years of service, how did you decide? You knew you wanted to get out. How did you make that decision, and how did you think about what was coming next?
I got hurt. It's kind of that simple. I got hurt. Took a boulder to the leg in Africa, training accident. And then I didn't let it heal properly because, if you get hurt on deployment, they send you home. And I was like, I didn't want them to send me home, so I walked on it before I should have. So that was part of the reason why. Another part was my mental health was not the best, and I felt it was time for me to finally address it. Now that I didn't have a deployment hanging over my head, I was like, it's about time I start, dealing with the things that keeps me up at night. And so as soon as we got back from deployment, I started seeing a mental health counselor on base. And I bounced around from various counselors to find the right fit, but eventually I did. I spent about 5 months, my initial run in therapy, talking about some really important things. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized I needed to talk about it. And the military isn't going to make that better, because when you're a service member, the mission always comes first. And sometimes that comes at detriment to the individual. It's why no matter if you deploy, no matter if you see combat or not, every veteran has served, and we're all equal because we all sacrifice. We sacrifice our individuality. We sacrifice, sometimes our families, family times. There's a very high rate of divorce in the military. I remember getting back, and there was this one gunny who, there was a situation with a kid trying to figure out if he wanted to deploy or not. And a gunny said, my wife hates me because I've missed 3 of our children's birth. That's something, there's time he's never going to get back. And so whether or not you deploy, you're going to miss something significant. And so, I was also tired of missing things, seeing my siblings grow up and, my parents. So, and I was ready for college, and also all my friends were getting out. So that's another reason. It's like, if I can't do this with my very best friends, then I don't really want to do this. So that's a lot of contributing factors. But, I got back and I started college, and there were a lot of people in the command who were willing to let me pursue college, and I'm really grateful for that. So, that was one term was it for me, for a lot of reasons.
What was the initial transition like? Do you feel that American society was helpful in helping you retransition to civilian life?
Not necessarily, but also because, society in general isn't involved with our transition process. And again, this is one of the tougher things about military life, but society kind of passes you by. Like life goes on without you because you're very removed from it. When I was in boot camp, I remember the first time it occurred to me that life just goes on. It's not like everyone's watching you, be a military person. Despite what TV shows may have you think, it's not true. I remember one day we were sitting there, and my drill instructor walks out and he goes, "Hey, the Falcons managed to win a football game for once." And it just occurred to me that I hadn't seen a football game in a while, right? And so it's just like, oh, time is passing, things are happening without you being there. And so that kind of clues you in that, life is going to go on without you, and you're doing something that is also very removed from the public. And that just gets compounded over the years, and you stop, if there's no cable, you're not in your room watching TV all the time, you're mostly training. And so TV shows come and go, and so you get out and people go, "Have you seen this show?" It's like, "No, I haven't." And so it's society doesn't help, but it's because society, it's a very, very large distance. And and also what makes it difficult is that the military doesn't help as much as they probably should on the back end, right? Because if you read any sort of news outlet, it's getting harder to recruit people, and it's also harder to retain people, harder to keep people in. One, because GI Bill's really nice, and two, because the culture of the military isn't the best. It doesn't after a certain point, people outgrow the military. Sometimes it happens sooner, sometimes it happens later, but you outgrow the military, and that desire for individuality comes back, because that's what they do a good job of saying, that you're a part of a team, you're part of a group mission. But eventually you start to become aware, like, there are personal desires that I have. And so when I first got out, it was actually very rough, because when I'm leaving active service with mental and physical injuries. I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and insomnia, along with my physical injuries, tinnitus, knee injuries, back injuries, ankle injuries, all those things. It's like, in a very real sense, you are broken. And so the military is like, okay, bye. Here's how you fill out a resume. This is what you wear to a job interview. You check a bunch of boxes, and it's like, okay, good luck. And that's not to mention all the things that retention recruiters try to tell you about post-military life to get you to stay in. So the first 2 months were really, really rough. Oh, that's a lie. The first 2 months were really, really great because I was on terminal leave, which is like a paid vacation. So I was still getting paid while being on 2 months of leave. That was wonderful. The 2 months after that, where it was officially over, that was really rough. And, because I get out and it's like, hey, here's all this paperwork showing how messed up you are. Good luck. And so I'm sort of just sitting with that. And to this day, I think I got to live with one of my best friends who we'd also served together. He had gotten out a year before me. And he was kind enough to let me stay with him my first 6 months out of the military, because I didn't want to go home. There was just strong aversion to just going back and to the life I had before the military. So I knew I wasn't going home, which means I didn't have a place to stay guaranteed. So it's like homeless veterans are a very real reality for a lot of people, and I was afraid of that. So I was very fortunate to have a good friend that let me stay with him for a while until I figured things out. And so yeah, that first 2 months was really, really rough. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to, I just went to school and went home. And he made efforts to drag me out of my room and say, "You're not staying up here all day. Like, you're gonna go talk to people." Like, hosted some house parties, I was able to start building a post-military identity after that. So, to be frank, Harry actually isn't my first name. It's my middle name, and I started using it after I joined the military. So everyone back home actually knows me as Charles or Charlie. But I wanted to, after the military, I wanted to be known as Harry, because it's an identity that I felt I could build for myself, and not be something that was imposed on me. Like, after the military, it's like, who am I? Well, I'm going to be Harry. I decide to be Harry. It felt like my choice. And so choice is a really big part of transitioning out, because for so long there are other people telling you what to do, how to live your life, where you're going to go. And so when you get out, it's like, I want to do what I want to do. And it's very important to sort of take the reins of your own identity. And so that's what I made efforts to do. And I wasn't very good at it at first, but a combination of good friends, a great job tutoring for my community college, and then Warrior Scholar Project really, really helped.
Can you talk about what Warrior Scholar Project involved for you personally?
Yeah. So, for one, it was the first space where someone asked me, what did I want to do, and what was possible, right? And maybe even a little bit what's impossible for you, right? So it's my initial plan after the military was to go get a master's degree in English and then go be a high school teacher, because I had some wonderful high school teachers. Shout out to Shakima Silveri, she's a wonderful person. And I thought, that would be a noble pursuit. Like, there's a lot of great teachers out there, and we need more of them. So that was my initial plan, planning to go to Cal State Fullerton. And then I go to Warrior Scholar Project, and I spend a week at Columbia. And it's like, no, actually, if I want, I can go be a college professor. I can go get a PhD. I can go to an elite school and put myself in the best position to achieve that goal. So that was the first environment where someone asked me what I wanted, what I really, really wanted, and I believed them when they said I could do it. There's these professors, because again, the lectures are taught by professors at that school. So if they're giving the lecture and they're saying, wow, that's a great idea, that's a great thought, I never thought of that before, there's a new sort of confidence, like, okay, I belong here, I can really, really do this. And I know a lot of my cohort felt the same way. There was 14 of us. Of those 14, 6 of us ended up going to Columbia. Everyone else went to various schools except for one. He went to like this sort of tech boot camp, and now he's working in tech. It's a fantastic career, making a lot of money. And of those of us that have gone to school, 2 of us have graduated, or 3 or 4 of us have graduated: Chapman, Cal Berkeley, Columbia. One is now on at Wharton. Another one, we're all finishing up our degrees, and it's like that. And we all come from different military backgrounds. We all did various jobs, and yet all of us have found that a certain level of success, and that's important for me, not just to see me do it, but to see other veterans from that cohort do it, because it means that it's nothing intrinsically with me that's making this program work. This program works because people who come here, the veterans who come here, want something more from higher education, and WSP is the organization I found that's best equipped to help them do that. And so it was a lot of, outside of the official schedule, my fellows were talking with us about what it's like to go to class, what it's like to struggle with VA, how do we use our benefits, what classes we should sign up for, things like that, and how to talk to teachers and how to interact with students, so another part of the curriculum that we've recently added, they didn't have it when I went through, but those conversations got formalized into what's now known as our college success curriculum, and those happen in the evenings before study time with the tutors. And so we have making the transition, community and culture, study skills and time management, essentially talking about what is it like to transition out of the military, what is it like to try to build a culture with civilians and a new identity and what all those things are. And those are very emotional conversations, because for a lot of veterans, it's the first time that someone asks them that with any sort of sincerity. Like, not just, hey, what do you want to do after the military, but like, hey, what was it like to serve, and how does that shape who you are now? So for me personally, those conversations were informal with my fellows and sometimes with the teachers during lunch, because the teachers go with us to lunch. And that's why it was such a great experience for me, because it seems like someone cares. A nonprofit that's built by veterans for veterans cares about who we turn out to be.
So you show up at Columbia as an undergrad, and you have undergrads who are several years younger than you. What's that experience like? You've had this really important experience of service. Many of these kids are coming straight from high school. How do you blend together in the classroom?
That's a fantastic question. It's so Warrior Scholar did a good job of helping me, preparing me for that, because there's no way really to prepare. Okay, I'll start there. A lot of veterans have imposter syndrome, where they feel like they don't belong somewhere. I know I had imposter syndrome. As excited as I was to get into Columbia, when I finally got there, it's like my first couple classes were with other non-traditional students. So Columbia has the School of General Studies, and it's made up of non-traditional students. It's about 40% veteran. There's a large population of former ballerinas there, and then various other kinds of non-traditional students. Sometimes people just worked for a couple years after high school. There's also foreign military like IDF. I've met some Ukrainian military. So it's really just anyone who has had a non-traditional path to college. So my first couple classes were actually with them, and they kind of understood, even if they weren't veterans, they kind of understood that process of like leaving home at 18 and life going, taking you different places, and then finally deciding to go back to school. So it wasn't that, having that initial adjustment helped. But then, for one, at least at Columbia, a lot of veterans typically go toward economics, tech, or politics, poli-sci. So I am a little bit of a rarity in choosing English and creative writing as my pursuits. So what that means is that I actually spend more time with traditional college students than my other veteran friends do, because a lot of them are, again, in the tech classes, computer science, coding, things like that. And I'm over here reading about like Thoreau and stuff. I don't really like Thoreau. He's kind of boring. So, in choosing to pursue English and creative writing, a lot of my classmates tend to be, between the ages of 20 and 22, and even more still, a lot of them are women. So that was another big adjustment, was, coming from the military, and literally division combat units are all men. And going to a place where it's not only a different age group, but a different gender as well. So that was another big adjustment, and it did feel very isolating at times, because we do just have vastly different experiences, but the commonality is in the interest. I want to write. I love reading books, and they do too. That's why they're here, and so finding a common ground that way has been really, really great for who I am. My initial position when I got to Columbia was that I didn't want to join any student veteran organizations. I deliberately stayed away from student veteran organizations because I wanted to seek out that civilian identity. And so, I joined, or I signed up for classes that I knew probably wouldn't have veterans in them. I joined a research fellowship. They're all significantly younger than me. But it's good because, one, it keeps me humble, because those kids, and I say kids very loosely, those kids put in a lot of work and effort to get to one of the best schools in the country, and they did it right out of high school. I didn't do that, so they got something figured out that I didn't have figured out. So, and a lot of times I end up learning from them quite a bit. And it's refreshing to see people that young who have such a mature head on their shoulders. Like one of my friends who's doing research, she's a Venezuelan, from a migrant Venezuelan family. And so a lot of her research is informed about, Venezuelan migration and trying to improve their situation. And it's like, you're 21. Like, why do you care so much, about this? And she's from that country, or her family's from that country, so it matters to her. But to have the maturity to try to make their lives better through policy or all these other things, through sociology, is just awe-inspiring, honestly. And then all the other people that I've met are like that. A lot of granted, kids are still kids, they do dumb things, but a lot of them surprisingly have really, really big dreams, and I feel like that's the commonality, specifically in higher education. A lot of them dream very big, and I think that's a problem for veterans, because we're told not to do that. We're told, the mission comes first. We're told, like, hey, don't worry about anything else. Concentrate on what this is right now, because if you don't, people could die, right? And so you're used to that mindset. So when you get out and you're like, okay, what do you want? It's hard to expand your mind and exercise that muscle. So my first few months at Columbia was just really relearning how to dream big and seeing what's possible. I got really, really lucky and blessed to be a part of a couple different things that set me up for success early. So, now I'm doing independent research into something that I find interesting, and I've also been able to slowly incorporate my own experience into it. And I've also been able to help other veterans as they come to Columbia too, so that they don't waste as much time trying to figure out what they should do in terms of comfortability. Like, no, if this is what you truly desire and what you're good at, that's what you should do. hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. We have a few minutes for questions. If you have questions for Harry, my colleague Bailey Regan has question cards that she can bring around to you if you're here in person. If you're joining us online, you can place questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. You've now helped other veterans on campus through the Warrior Scholar Project. So between their experience and yours, what can the military do better? What can we as a society do better to help aid in this transition?
So I'll start with the military because it's what I'm more familiar with. As much as their agenda orients them toward ensuring the security of our country and our assets, there is one thing that I think doesn't cost any money that would be beneficial, and I think that in that transition program, because a lot of the transition programs are about a week long and they smush so much into them, there at some point it should probably be expanded, and there just needs to be a moment where you ask the people getting out, how do you feel about it? Like in any, and you do it all the time in school, right? Like when you're learning to write, your teacher will ask, how did it feel to try that out? Like how did it feel to solve that problem? You know, and sort of meta reflection so that you get a chance to, one, replicate the results, two, solidify your purpose in doing something. And a lot of the people getting out are one-termers. They do one term and they get out, and a lot of them are people fresh out of high school who had nothing else to do. So these are people who are still forming their identity, and then in the military they're forced to grow up very, very fast, right? And so I think it's important for the military to include some kind of counseling session where you sit down with a group of people getting out and you go, how did that feel to do that for the past 4 or 5 years? And just allow them to honestly express themselves and to sort of try to get some more of their individuality back, because that's what they're going towards, right? They're not going to be Corporal Foster anymore. They're going to be Harry. They're going to be John or whoever. So I think it's important for the military to it's important for the military specifically to start asking that question, so that way it creates a feeling of closure, right? Because who knows what can happen when veterans don't feel a sense of closure, like they feel like I'm missing something. Maybe there's something I didn't do, or maybe I'm too hurt to continue my service. And I'm in no way saying this is a direct correlation or even a causation, but you have to think about the number of veterans that were a part of the events of January 6th, right? I think it was 20% of that crowd were veterans, and whichever side of the aisle you fall on, they felt disenfranchised in some way. They felt unheard, and some of that was probably the military. You can make your arguments about how much on the society's end, but some of that started with the military not asking those questions. And I think it's time that the military specifically, starts asking those questions and hearing those answers, because one, it's going to help them prepare, like modify their programs to the trends that you see veterans say about, like, oh, I don't know if I really agree with this, or I don't know if this really helped me with this. Then it would only, like equality insurance, it would only improve the transition program as we leave the military into civilian society. And on society's end, that's a little tougher because society is so vast. There's so many different aspects of it. And as our veterans regain identity, we're not homogenous at all. That's another common misconception about the military, is that we're all somehow red state Republicans. That's very untrue. A vast political ideological perspective in the military, and I've run across all of them. Anyone you could probably think of, I've run across people who believe that. And so, the military is a microcosm of America. We're not some isolated, homogenous group. And so society, it's harder to say what society should do, because there's so many parts of it. What I can say is that the more society tries to reinforce individual identity in the veteran, the better. the sooner we can figure out what we want to do, the sooner we can, regain our sense of purpose, the better we'll try to fit in. Because that's one of the things is that, when we're still feeling like we're a corporal, whoever, we still feel like we're wearing a uniform, all we feel is that distance. All we feel is society passing us by. So any program like the Warrior Scholar Project, Service to School, Team Red, White, and Blue, Team Rubicon, anything that endorses that sense of individuality after the military, while accepting the parts of the military identity the veteran wants to keep, is a good thing.
We've talked about how far removed the average American is from the experience of those who serve.
Yeah.
How do you think that gap should be closed? And would it be helpful, someone asks, if we had a requirement for all young people to serve in some way, even if it's not in the military?
That's a tough question, and it's one that gets debated a lot, especially when you see other countries do it. And hopefully I could do this justice, but let's see. I think so. Bit of history. The civilian-military divide began sometime during the Civil War, when military became a professional practice, right? When you have officers going to West Point, which was originally an engineering school, getting a professional education in warfare, that is when that gap starts to happen, when it becomes a job that people do, that some people do that others do not do, versus the Revolutionary War and every war before that. Everyone knows about the war effort and everyone participates in their own way. Maybe not everyone's fighting, but everyone's making clothes, making guns, bullets, things like that, making fortifications because, the country's identity is on the line. In the Civil War, that gap gets created and it starts to widen, right? And then in the World Wars, as we, again, go off to fight, like we leave our country to go fight, even in a draft, that becomes a professional thing. We are being paid to do that. And even though the country is, again, aware of the war effort and aware of, and they're contributing, like they're doing war bonds, they're, using scrap metal to make bullets and guns, and they're making uniforms. Even though they're doing that, they're not fighting directly. And so that gap between, and then those soldiers and service members come home and they have an experience that is vastly different from anything that's happening in America. So that gap widens. And then as time progresses, while soldiers are away, life still has to go on, right? So that limbo effect that people experience in the military about life going on, elections still have to happen, right? Who are you going to listen to? You're going to listen to the general who's off fighting a war. You're going to listen to the guy who checks on you, make sure you have running water, make sure the roads are clean, make sure crime is down, right? So that military leader is not making decisions anymore. It's the community leader, right? So our politicians are now making decisions. So that gap becomes even wider. And in the widening of the gap, and in the time that we spend overseas and not at home, life goes on around us. You learn to function without us, and so when you come back, it's hard to reconcile those things. There's so many movies that have been made just about that moment of coming back and trying to reconcile that kind of behavior. So I think that's probably one of the difficulties, and that's kind of where it started in terms of shrinking that gap. I will say one of the answers that I guess Eisenhower warned about was the military-industrial complex, tying too much of our infrastructure to the military industry, which has been kind of unavoidable in some respects. And I think it's why it's important that we have a balance of civilian experience and military experience and in the areas of our country of people making decisions. So Congress, Senate, I don't think the current president has any military experience, but he has family that has military experience. So I think the best way is to, again, maintain that balance in our decision-making practices, as far as how the country is run, and also culturally trying to maintain a balance between military experience and civilian experience. Because while it's important for us to protect this country and our ideals, it's also important to remember why we're fighting. It's also important to remember what we're fighting for. And if this country becomes too militarized, then we lose that. We lose our sense of peace and wonder and imagination, everything that makes America great, in the sense that people leave their home countries every year in droves to come here and try to make a better life. So we can't get rid of that, but we also can't have too much of that, because if we do, then we potentially weaken our ability to protect ourselves. So it's always a careful balance. I hope that answered your question to some degree.
We're rapidly running out of time,
Yeah.
but I'll try to fit 2 more questions in.
Okay.
What would you say to a soldier who is considering the Warrior Scholar project as they're leaving the military?
A common misconception is that the Warrior Scholar Project is meant to get you into school, and that's exactly what our mission has been. But we're also a skill-based thing, right? So just because you go through our program doesn't mean that you necessarily should go into higher education if that's not what's best for you. Like one of my actual roommate from my time at Warrior Scholar, when I was going through, he ended up in tech. He ended up not going to school. Maybe he'll eventually go back to school at some point. But it's not like that's. It's okay to explore. Coming to a Warrior Scholar project is meant to give you, a taste of a possibility. And if you find that you want to go to school and you want to pursue higher education, Warrior Scholar is one of the best programs out there to help you adjust to school life, as well as develop skills that are going to make you successful.
Can you talk about your creative writing? Do your professors expect you to write about the military? And what is that kind of deciding what to write like for you?
No. That's a very easy. They don't even expect me to write about the military. No, creative writing. I mean, I've been doing creative writing is actually one of the few parts of me that has existed long before the military. As a kid, I wrote little stories and notebooks and stuff, and my dad's a writer, so I've always been writing. And creative writing has just been a way for me to. I feel most complete when I can express myself. And that typically happens through storytelling, through poetry. So that was just a product of me going to Warrior Scholar and realizing, no, this is what I want to do. I enjoy writing in all its forms, and it's an individual part of who I am. I encourage other veterans doing it because it can be helpful for dealing with military experience. I have several veteran friends who are also in creative writing programs, and they all say it's cathartic to write, fictional stories about things that have elements of the military in them, and it's been cathartic for me too. So I encourage veterans to do it, but it's not something that I think every veteran needs to do.
Finally, as we were kind of gathering, we were talking a little bit about the phrase "thank you for your service." Can you talk about what that's like for you, and how would you prefer those of us who didn't serve in the military express gratitude?
I would say to express as much gratitude as you feel. If you feel gratitude, then when someone holds the door open for me, I say thank you. I don't do it because I don't say thank you to everyone for holding doors open ever. It's specifically in that moment when I feel the gratitude of someone holding a door open for me. I would say the last thing veterans want, and sometimes I know that it can feel kind of weird when people say it sort of uninterestedly. When it feels like a reflex, it can feel like you're just kind of saying that because I had a uniform on, but you don't know what I did, right? You don't know you don't know that I spent days on end just waiting for things to happen. I didn't do anything. So that when it comes off sort of reflexively, I know that can sometimes make veterans feel like we're not individuals and we're just a uniform. And I'm trying not to speak for all veterans because everyone has a different experience, but I would say again, if you consciously feel gratitude for someone serving in the military, then absolutely say thank you like you would to anyone else who does anything for you. If you don't feel it, don't say it. I think it's very rare. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think it's very rare where a veteran's going to ask you to thank them for their service. I know I would never do that, and honestly, I would probably cringe at anyone I'd heard doing that. So, yeah, that's my stance, and I'm willing to die on that hill.
Well, Harry, we unfortunately need to stop there. Thank you for taking the time. I'm sure you're busy as a Columbia undergraduate to be with us today. Thank you for all that you've done for our country and for all that you continue to do to help veterans like yourself readjust to civilian society. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you all for being here today, too. We hope you'll stick around whether you're here in person or online and join us for worship at 11 a.m. And next week, we'll be welcoming a professor from George Washington University, David Silverman, who's going to talk about Thanksgiving, especially from an Indian perspective. So hope you'll be back with us next week.